Welcome to All Things Storybound, a creative outlet where any and all kinds of stories come to life.
From magical to mythical to mortifying, let us take you on a journey you've never experienced before.
Grab your favorite drink and get comfortable. You're in for a wild story ahead. Chapter 1.
The job ad had been simple. Almost too simple. Night shift dispatcher wanted. No experience necessary. Quiet work environment. It was the kind of listing you skim past on job boards without a second thought. But after 6 months of unemployment, I wasn't in a position to be picky. My savings account was dwindling, my roommate Brian was sick of covering my share of the rent, and I was starting to think I'd hit rock bottom. So when P&R Freight called me for an interview, I didn't hesitate. The industrial park was dead silent when I pulled in, my car's headlights sweeping across empty parking lots and crumbling warehouses. P&R Freight's building sat at the far end, a plain concrete box with a flickering light over the entrance. The company logo on the side of the building was barely legible, the paint faded and peeling. I parked in the gravel lot, the crunch of stones under my tires the only sound in the stillness. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the dark windows and the faint glow spilling out from the lobby. Something about the place felt off. I shook it off. "It's just a job," I muttered, stepping out of the car. Greg, the office manager, was waiting just inside the lobby. He wasn't what I expected. Wiry and pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "You're Jason," he said, his voice flat and tired. "That's me," I replied, offering a smile he didn't return. Greg jerked his head toward a hallway behind him. "Dispatch office is this way." The dispatch area wasn't much to look at. It was a bullpen-style setup with several desks crammed together in the center of the room. Overhead, buzzing fluorescents cast a faint greenish tint on everything, making the already dreary space feel even more lifeless. Most of the desks were buried under stacks of paperwork, empty coffee cups, and outdated equipment. Only Greg's desk had any personal touches, a battered radio and a framed picture of a dog. "Where's mine?" I asked, glancing around. Greg gestured toward a door at the back of the bullpen. "You're in there." The door led to a small enclosed office, just large enough for a desk, chair, and an ancient-looking computer. 2 narrow windows offered views of the bullpen on one side and the hallway on the other. I stepped inside, the faint smell of mildew and cigarette smoke immediately hitting my nose. "This is mine?" I asked, turning back to Greg. "Yep," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Why do I get the private room?" Greg shrugged. "Night shift requires privacy, less distractions." His answer didn't sit right with me. Everyone else worked out in the open, but the night dispatcher got an enclosed space. It felt less like a perk and more like a quarantine zone. I glanced at the window facing the hallway. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by a single flickering light above a vending machine. Shadows gathered at the edges, where the weak glow couldn't quite reach. Something about it made my skin crawl. Greg dropped a massive 3-ring binder onto the desk with a heavy thud. "This is yours now," he said, motioning toward it with his hand. The binder looked ancient, its leather cover cracked and frayed at the edges. I flipped it open, expecting to find a list of truck routes or emergency procedures. Instead, the first thing I saw was a single sheet of paper taped to the inside cover. The handwriting was blocky and uneven, scrawled hastily in black ink. 1. Never leave your office for any reason. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. I stared at the rules, then looked up at Greg. "What's this about?" He paused for a long moment. "Just follow the rules." Hide and pray? Seriously? It's not complicated. I raised an eyebrow. So what happens if I don't follow the rules? Greg's expression didn't change, but his tone grew quieter, heavier. You don't want to find out. Greg's version of training was rushed and vague. He spent the next hour walking me through the dispatch system, a clunky program that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The trucks were color-coded on a grid, green for on time, yellow for delays, and red for problems. My job was to monitor their movements, update logs, and call drivers if anything seemed off. Phones are for emergencies, Greg said, tapping the landline sitting on my desk. What counts as an emergency? I asked. You'll know when it happens, he replied. I frowned. That's not really helpful. You don't need helpful, he said, pointing at the binder. You just need to follow the rules. At 9:50, Greg stood up and grabbed his jacket. Wait, I said. What if something happens that I'm not ready for? Make note of it, and we'll handle it in the morning, he said without turning around. And if it's something bad? Greg paused in the doorway, one hand on the knob. For the first time, he looked directly at me, his eyes tired but serious. Follow the rules, he said quietly. Then he stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. The room felt different without Greg. The fluorescents overhead buzzed softly, the analog clock on the wall ticked with an annoying regularity, and the hum of the vending machine in the hallway was just barely audible through the glass. I sat at the desk, staring at the binder. The rules on the first page nagged at me, their simplicity somehow making them worse. 1. Never leave your office for any reason. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. They didn't make any sense. Why couldn't I leave the office? What was the deal with the phone? And hide and pray? That sounded more like a survival manual than a workplace policy. I glanced at the hallway window, my stomach tightening. The vending machine's flickering light barely reached the far end of the corridor, where shadows gathered like a living thing. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on the computer screen. You're overthinking this, I muttered. It's just a job. A weird job. But just a job. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me.
Chapter 2.
The silence pressed in around me as soon as Greg left. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed faintly in the enclosed office, leaving me alone with the hum of the fluorescents and the faint ticking of the analog clock above the door. I told myself this was fine. This was what I'd signed up for. A quiet job, no customers, no coworkers breathing down my neck. Just me, a desk, and a list of trucks to monitor. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. I opened the dispatch system, the ancient system sluggishly loading a map of the region. Tiny green icons dotted the screen, representing the trucks currently on schedule. A few were yellow, meaning delays, but none of them seemed urgent. The landline phone sat silent, its coil cord stretched taut like a sleeping snake. I flipped open the binder again, skimming past the rules on the first page. 1. Never leave your office for any reason. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. The words unsettled me as much as they had the first time I read them. I flipped through the rest of the binder, hoping for answers. It was mostly procedural stuff. Radio codes, emergency contacts, and checklists for different situations. Nothing about the rules. Nothing that explained why I couldn't leave the office or what I was supposed to be hiding from. I tried not to think about it too much. Just a quiet night, I muttered to myself. Nothing to worry about. My eyes kept drifting to the window overlooking the hallway. The vending machine at the far end flickered in and out of focus, casting shifting shadows along the walls. The light above it buzzed faintly, and beyond its reach, the corridor dissolved into darkness. Something about the hallway bothered me. The rest of the building was silent. Too silent. I hadn't heard Greg leave the lot. Hadn't heard a car door slam or an engine start. Just the faint click of the office door, and then nothing. I stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the bullpen. The desks were empty, their cluttered surfaces untouched since Greg's exit. I shifted my gaze to the hallway window, squinting into the dim light. Nothing moved. Relax, I told myself, heading back to the desk. You're being paranoid. At 10:45, I heard it. A faint thump. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The sound was soft, but deliberate, like someone knocking lightly on a door. I glanced toward the hallway window, my pulse quickening. The vending machine buzzed faintly in the distance, its flickering light illuminating the corridor. But beyond that, the hallway was empty. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet office. No answer. I reached for the flashlight Greg had left in the desk drawer, gripping it tightly as I approached the window. I pointed the beam into the hallway, the light cutting through the shadows. Nothing. I turned back to the desk, shaking my head. Probably just the building settling, I muttered, setting the flashlight down. Old places make noise. But the excuse felt thin, even to me. For the next hour, I busied myself with the logs, trying to distract myself from the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The trucks moved across the map in slow, predictable patterns, their statuses unchanged. I updated the system, marked a few notes in the logbook, and sipped at the stale coffee Greg had left behind. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my attention kept drifting back to the hallway. The vending machine's light flickered intermittently, and I caught myself staring at the edges of the shadows, half expecting something to move. The analog clock ticked steadily, each second dragging out longer than the last. By 11:30, my nerves were shot. The thump came again, louder this time, closer. I grabbed the flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called again, stepping toward the hallway window. The light above the vending machine flickered violently, plunging the corridor into brief bursts of darkness. My hand trembled as I aimed the flashlight into the hallway. Nothing. But the unease had settled deeper into my bones now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond the edges of the light, waiting. I backed away from the window, my eyes darting between the hallway and the phone on my desk. It stayed silent. At 11:47, the phone rang. The sharp ring cut through the silence like a knife, making me jump. I fumbled for the receiver, nearly knocking the headset off the desk before pressing it to my ear. "Dispatch," I said, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, faintly, a voice crackled through the line. Dark. So dark. The words sent a chill crawling down my spine. "Who is this?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Lost. Mile marker 33. The voice was faint, distorted by bursts of static, but the tone was unmistakable. Scared. Desperate. I opened the system and typed mile marker 33 into the search bar. Nothing came up. "What's your truck number?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. More static. Then, just before the line went dead, "Jason." I stared at the receiver, my heart racing. I checked the system again, searching for any record of a truck near mile marker 33. Still nothing. The binder offered no guidance. The rest of its pages were just procedural nonsense. Nothing about phone calls, nothing about the rules, nothing about the voice I just heard. The second rule on the first page stared up at me like a warning. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. It wasn't my voice. At least, I didn't think it was, but something about the call felt wrong. I set the receiver down carefully, my hands trembling. It's just a prank, I muttered, trying to convince myself. Weird interference, that's all. But the excuse felt hollow. I glanced back at the hallway window, my stomach tightening. The vending machine's light had stopped flickering, casting the corridor in a steady glow. But the shadows beyond its reach seemed darker than before, deeper somehow. My pulse quickened as I stared into the hallway, half expecting to see something move. Nothing did. I turned back to the desk, picking up the pen to finish logging a truck's arrival. My hand shook as I wrote, the letters uneven and jagged. The analog clock ticked steadily, each second dragging longer than the last. By midnight, the silence felt unbearable.
Chapter 3.
The silence after the first call was almost worse than the call itself. I sat at the desk, staring at the receiver as if it might come alive in my hand. My fingers hovered above the logbook, the pen trembling slightly as I debated whether or not to record what I'd just heard. I wasn't even sure how to describe it. A trucker who wouldn't give their ID? A lost driver near a mile marker in an unknown state and road? No, it was the voice. The way it said my name. Jason? That wouldn't leave my mind. It didn't sound quite right. Too low, too distorted, as if it had come from somewhere deep underground. I forced myself to write something down, if only to give my hands something to do. 11:47 p.m. Unknown call. Mile marker 33. Caller unknown. I capped the pen and leaned back in the chair, trying to steady my breathing. The phone sat silent now, its coiled cord limp on the desk, but the oppressive quiet in the office felt heavier than before. The faint thump I'd heard earlier came again, but this time it was louder. I froze, my ear straining to pinpoint its origin. The sound seemed to come from somewhere just beyond the window that faced the hallway. The hallway was empty. But the thump came again, followed by a faint scraping sound. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, backing away from the window and returning to my desk. I didn't want to be near the hallway, not anymore. At 12:13, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated before picking it up. My hand hovered above the receiver, my breath caught in my throat. When I finally mustered the courage to answer, I pressed the receiver to my ear. "Dispatch," I said, my voice shaking. The line was silent at first, just a faint crackle of static. Then the voice came again, faint but clear. "Jason, why did you leave?" My heart skipped a beat. "I didn't leave," I whispered, gripping the phone tightly. The voice didn't respond. "Who is this?" I demanded, my tone more desperate now. The line crackled, the voice barely audible beneath the static. "Jason, you shouldn't be there." A chill ran down my spine. "Where? Here?" I asked, glancing around the office as if the voice might materialize out of thin air. The static grew louder, drowning out the voice. Then, just before the line went dead, "Don't look behind you." The click of the receiver slamming down was almost automatic. I couldn't bear to hear more. The words echoed in my head. "Don't look behind you." I was too scared to move. My hands gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles white as I stared straight ahead. I could see the faint reflection of the room in the glass window that faced the bullpen. Everything looked normal. But the weight of the words gnawed at me, growing heavier with each passing second. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to stay still, I turned my head. There was nothing behind me, just the chair, the phone, and the faint glow of the computer screen. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to relax. "See," I muttered to myself, "there's nothing there." But the relief was short-lived. At 12:35, the phone rang for a third time. I stared at it for a long moment, the sound drilling into my skull. The receiver seemed heavier now, more menacing. I didn't want to answer it. If the phone was ringing, it was my responsibility. I reached for the receiver with trembling hands, pressing it to my ear. "Dispatch," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The line was silent at first, just the faint crackle of static. Then, slowly, a voice emerged. "You can't hide forever, Jason." My stomach dropped. I tried to respond, but the words caught in my throat. "We're coming." The line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there, staring at the phone, my mind racing. The first call had unsettled me. The second had terrified me. But this felt like a threat. "We're coming." Who? I stood up, pacing the small office as my thoughts spiraled. Greg hadn't mentioned anything like this during training. The binder had no answers, no protocols for dealing with whatever this was. I glanced at the rules again, the blocky handwriting on the first page glaring up at me like a challenge. 1. Never leave your office for any reason. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. It wasn't my voice. Not yet. But the thought of hearing it, that distorted, otherworldly version of my own voice, made my skin crawl. The phone rang again at 1:00 a.m. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the receiver and pressed it to my ear, my voice shaky but firm. "Dispatch." There was no static this time, no crackling or distortion. The line was clear. "Jason." The voice was unmistakable. It was Greg. "I need you to come out here," he said, his tone calm but urgent. "Greg?" I asked, relief washing over me. "Where are you?" "Down the hall," he said. "I need you to check something for me." I frowned. Greg wasn't supposed to be here. He'd left hours ago. "What's going on?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, "It's important, Jason. Just come out here." I stared at the door leading into the hallway, my pulse quickening. Something about Greg's tone felt off. "Why can't you come here?" I asked. Another pause. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Just trust me, Jason. You need to come out here." The words didn't sit right. Greg hadn't seemed like the type to ask for help, especially not in the middle of the night when he wasn't even on shift. The rules flashed through my mind again. Never leave your office for any reason. "I can't," I said, gripping the receiver tightly. "I'm not supposed to leave." Silence. Then Greg's voice came again, lower this time. "Jason, don't make this harder than it has to be." The line went dead.
Chapter 4.
The sound of my name and Greg's voice hung in the air, sharp and heavy like a blade pressed against my skin. The phone was still in my hand, the dial tone buzzing faintly in my ear. Slowly, I set the receiver down, my movements mechanical, like I was afraid any sudden action might trigger something. Greg wasn't supposed to be here. I'd watched him leave hours ago. He'd walked down the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. So how was he back? At 1:03 a.m., the knock came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate taps, soft but insistent. I froze, my eyes snapping to the hallway window. The vending machine's flickering light illuminated the corridor, casting jagged shadows along the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the end of the hallway, a flicker of something pale against the darkness. Then the knock came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Jason, Greg's voice called from the other side of the door, calm and steady. Open up. The words from the binder screamed in my mind. Never leave your office for any reason. I stared at the door, my breath caught in my throat. Jason, Greg yelled again. Come on, man. I just need you to check something for me. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to stand. I glanced at the window facing the bullpen, hoping to see, I don't know, something normal. But the bullpen was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescents. Greg? I called, my voice trembling. Yeah, he replied instantly. It's me. The knock came again, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Open the door, Jason. Something wasn't right. Greg hadn't been friendly when I first met him. He'd been curt, dismissive, eager to get out of here. Now his voice sounded almost too warm, too casual, like he was forcing the familiarity. Why are you here? I asked, my voice shaky. There was a long pause before he answered. I forgot something. Just let me in, all right? What did you forget? Another pause. Does it matter? He said finally, his tone sharpening. Just open the damn door. I backed away, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. My eyes darted to the binder, the rules screaming at me to stay put. Greg, I said, forcing as much steadiness into my voice as I could muster. I can't leave the office. You told me that yourself. Silence. Then, softer now. Jason, you're being ridiculous. Open the door. I stared at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. If it really was Greg, then what was the harm? He'd given me this job, trained me. Well, sort of. I didn't owe him anything, but I didn't want to piss him off either. But if it wasn't Greg, my stomach churned at the thought. If it wasn't Greg, then who, or what, was out there? Jason, the voice called again, its warmth slipping into irritation. I'm not going to ask again. I took a step closer to the door, my hand hovering over the knob. Why didn't I hear your car? I asked suddenly. Another pause. Come on, Jason, Greg said, his tone light but strained. You're overthinking this. The words sent a chill crawling up my spine. Greg had said the same thing earlier, just before he'd left. Don't overthink it. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he'd said them. The cadence, the inflection. It was wrong. Jason, the voice repeated, sharper now. Open the door. I took a step back. You're not Greg, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The knock came again, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Don't be stupid, the voice snapped, the warmth gone now, replaced by something colder, darker. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking as the knocking turned into pounding. Bang, bang, bang. Jason, the voice roared, its tone no longer human. The pounding continued, each impact rattling the thin walls. Jason, the voice screamed again, now distorted, echoing like it came from somewhere far away. "Open the door!" I slid under the desk, clutching the binder to my chest like a shield. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps as the pounding grew louder, more frantic. The lights overhead flickered, casting the room in alternating flashes of brightness and shadow. Then, just suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. The silence was deafening. I stayed under the desk, my heart hammering in my chest. My grip on the binder was so tight that my knuckles ached, but I didn't loosen it. For a moment, there was nothing. No pounding, no yelling. Just the faint hum of the fluorescents and the distant buzz of the vending machine. I thought it was over. Then the knob on the office door turned. I froze, my eyes fixed on the door. The knob turned slowly, rattling faintly as if someone on the other side was testing it. "Jason," the voice called, softer now, almost sing-song. "You can't stay in there forever." My stomach twisted into knots. The voice had changed again, the cadence lighter but still carrying that same inhuman edge. "You're scared, aren't you?" it said, almost mockingly. "You should be." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The knob rattled again, harder this time. "I just want to talk," it said, the words dripping with false sincerity. "Don't you trust me, Jason?" I don't know how long I stayed under the desk, clutching the binder like a lifeline. Time seemed to stretch and blur, each second dragging on like an eternity. The voice continued, alternating between coaxing and demanding. "Jason, open the door." "Come on, don't be like this. You can't hide forever." But no matter what it said, I didn't move. Eventually, the voice faded, its words trailing off into silence. The knob stopped rattling, the footsteps beyond the door receding into the distance. I waited, listening for any sign that it might come back. Nothing. When I finally crawled out from under the desk, my body ached from being cramped in the small space for so long. My hands were stiff, my fingers still curled tightly around the edges of the binder. The office looked the same as it always had. Dingy carpet, buzzing fluorescents, cluttered desks visible through the window overlooking the bullpen. But it didn't feel the same. Something had changed. I stepped to the hallway window, peering out into the corridor. The vending machine's light flickered faintly in the distance, casting jagged shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should. The hallway was empty.
Chapter 5.
The silence in the office felt thicker now, suffocating. I stayed by the hallway window, my breath fogging the glass as I peered out into the corridor. The vending machine hummed faintly in the distance, its flickering light casting shadows that rippled and stretched in unnatural ways. The door to my office was still locked, the knob twisted slightly from where Greg had tried to force it open. I told myself it was over, that whatever had been out there was gone. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I returned to the desk, collapsing into the chair with a heavy thud. My legs felt like jelly, trembling beneath the weight of the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The binder sat open in front of me, its pages slightly crumpled from where I'd been clutching it. The rules stared back at me, stark and unforgiving. 1. Never leave your office for any reason. 2. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. I grabbed a pen from the desk drawer and hovered it over the logbook. My hand shook as I tried to decide what to write. 1:03 a.m. Someone claiming to be Greg. Knocking, yelling. Not Greg. I stared at the words, the blocky letters swimming on the page as my vision blurred with exhaustion. What was I even supposed to do with this information? Who would I tell? At 1:45, the phone rang again. The sound was sharp and jarring, slicing through the oppressive quiet. My body jolted, the receiver feeling heavier in my hand than it had any right to be. "Dispatch," I said, my voice trembling. For a moment, the line was silent. Then came the static, faint at first, but growing louder, like a storm rolling in over the phone. "Jason." My stomach twisted into knots. "Who is this?" I demanded, gripping the receiver tightly. The static grew louder, drowning out everything else. I was about to hang up when the voice came through again, barely audible over the noise. "It's still here." I froze. "What's still here?" I whispered. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, the dial tone buzzing faintly in my ear. My hand was still gripping the receiver, my knuckles white with tension. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from the hallway. It was soft, barely perceptible at first, like the sound of fabric brushing against the floor. But it grew louder, more distinct, the footsteps slow and deliberate. I turned toward the hallway window, my heart pounding in my chest. The vending machine's light flickered, its glow casting jagged shadows across the corridor. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the vending machine. But when the light flickered again, it was gone. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling as I clutched the binder to my chest. The rules were burned into my mind now, the words looping endlessly in my thoughts. Never leave your office for any reason. If someone calls and it's your voice, hide and pray. But they weren't enough. The rules didn't account for the knock at the door, the distorted voice pretending to be Greg, or the footsteps echoing through the hallway. I glanced at the logbook, my pen hovering over the page. I needed to write something down, anything that might help me make sense of what was happening. 1:45 a.m. Footsteps in the hallway. Possible shadow at the vending machine. Phone call. It's still here. The analog clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging out longer than the last. The hours stretched on, the oppressive quiet in the office pressing down on me like a weight. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the hallway light made my skin crawl. By 3 a.m., the exhaustion had set in. My eyelids felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish and jumbled, but I didn't dare close my eyes. The voice on the phone, the figure in the hallway, the relentless knocking, I couldn't get any of it out of my head. At 3:47 a.m., there was one last noise, a faint scrape like fingernails dragging against the metal frame of the office door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was slow and deliberate, a rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch that sent chills racing down my spine. I clutched the flashlight in one hand and the binder in the other, my body trembling as I pressed myself against the back wall of the office. The scratching stopped abruptly, leaving the silence thicker than ever. By the time the first rays of sunlight spilled through the narrow hallway windows, I felt like a ghost of myself. My body ached from tension, my hands stiff and sore from gripping the binder all night. The hallway was bathed in pale light now, the vending machine's glow drowned out by the rising sun. I cautiously approached the office door, peeking through the small window at the top. The corridor was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the vending machine. Whatever had been there, it was gone now. I sat back at the desk, staring at the binder. The rules stared back at me, their blocky letters etched into my mind. But they weren't enough. Not anymore. Grabbing the pen, I flipped to the inside cover and carefully wrote a third rule beneath the others. 3. don't trust your coworkers between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I set the pen down, and my hands trembled as I closed the binder. The job wasn't what I'd expected. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was something else, something I didn't fully understand, but couldn't walk away from. As the analog clock ticked towards 7 a.m., I knew one thing for certain. I'd be back tomorrow night.